My name is Margaret. I'm 61 years old, and last month my own son slapped me 15 times in front of his wife. He did it in the dining room I built with my late husband's hands, surrounded by the furniture I polished every Sunday. Each slap was followed by her laughter, a sound that cut deeper than the pain itself. They thought I was powerless, that I had nowhere else to go. But what they didn't know was that the house they humiliated me in was still mine. Stay tuned and support this channel for more real stories like mine. That Sunday had started like any other. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting soft golden patterns on the kitchen walls. I had woken early, as I always did, to prepare lunch for my son Daniel and his wife Melissa. It was supposed to be a peaceful day, one of those rare moments when families gather, eat, and share simple laughter. I had made his favorite chicken pot pie with extra thyme, just the way he used to love it when he was little. Back then, he'd sit on the counter, swinging his tiny legs, watching me cook and asking if angels ate food too. That memory felt like another lifetime. Now, Daniel was 39. His face had hardened with the years, his smile replaced by a constant tension that never seemed to leave him. Melissa, on the other hand, had the kind of charm that could melt anyone's defenses, anyone but mine. There was something behind her polished smile that always felt calculated, something cold and rehearsed. Still, I tolerated her for Daniel's sake. After all, peace was worth more than pride, wasn't it? Or so I had told myself for years. Melissa arrived first, wearing a perfume so sharp it made the whole house feel smaller. She carried a store-bought cake, the cheap kind with too much frosting, and placed it on the table as if it were a peace offering. "For you, Mother Margaret," she said with that brittle smile. "Thank you, dear," I replied, even though I could see the mocking glint in her eyes. She knew I didn't eat sweets because of my diabetes. She knew it well. Daniel arrived 30 minutes later, slamming the front door so hard the frames on the wall rattled. His jaw was tight, his movements quick and sharp. "Rough day?" I asked gently. He didn't answer. He tossed his keys onto the counter and sank into the chair like a storm ready to break. I wanted to say something comforting, but over the years I had learned that silence was often safer than sympathy. We began eating in uneasy quiet. The clinking of forks against plates echoed through the room. I tried to lighten the mood, mentioning that the roof had started leaking again. "Maybe you could help me call someone to fix it," I said softly. His fork stopped midway to his mouth. "The roof in my house, you mean?" The tone in his voice made my stomach twist. "Daniel," I said carefully, "this was our family home. Your father. Don't bring Dad into this," he snapped. "You live here because of my generosity. Don't forget that." Melissa's lips curved into a slow smile as she took a sip of her wine, pretending not to listen but enjoying every word. My throat tightened. I wanted to remind him that I had paid for this house, that after my husband died, I had sold the small apartment we'd shared for 30 years to help Daniel buy this bigger place. He was the one who suggested putting it in his name for tax reasons. I trusted him. A mother always trusts her son. But I also kept the original deed, tucked safely away in my dresser drawer, a silent piece of paper that now felt like the only ally I had left. "It's just a leak, Daniel," I said, trying to sound calm. "You don't have to." "Don't tell me what I have to do," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The plates jumped. Melissa chuckled under her breath. "Have you forgotten," Daniel continued, his voice growing louder, "that you'd be in a nursing home right now if it wasn't for me? You should be grateful." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling under the table. "I am grateful," I whispered. "Then act like it." He stood up suddenly, towering over me. His eyes were dark, almost unrecognizable. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." When I lifted my gaze, the first slap came sharp, sudden, shocking. The sound echoed off the kitchen tiles. I froze. My son, the child I had carried, nursed, and protected, had just struck me. Daniel, I breathed. But before I could say more, the second slap came. Then the third. Melissa covered her mouth as if in horror, but her eyes sparkled with satisfaction. By the fifth blow, my face was burning. By the 10th, I stopped counting. 15 times. 15 strikes from the same hands I once held to teach him how to write his name. He stepped back, panting, his chest rising and falling. "Maybe now you'll learn some respect," he said coldly. I sat there, still, my ears ringing, the room spinning around me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply felt something inside me harden, a quiet, icy resolve forming in the space where love had just died. Melissa leaned toward him. "Come on, honey," she said sweetly, patting his arm. "Let's not ruin the evening. She'll learn." They both walked to the living room, leaving me sitting there with the untouched plates and the bitter smell of betrayal hanging in the air. When I finally stood up, my legs were trembling. I walked slowly down the hallway to my bedroom, every step echoing like a goodbye. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed. For a long time, I simply stared at my hands. They were shaking not from pain, but from the weight of realization. The boy I raised was gone. The man who replaced him was a stranger. I touched my swollen cheek and let the tears fall silently. They weren't tears of weakness anymore. They were tears of clarity. That night, as I lay awake, I remembered the drawer in my dresser, the one where I kept the old folded piece of paper. The house deed, still under my name. They thought they owned me because I lived under their roof. But in truth, they lived under mine. A slow, cold calm settled over me. Tomorrow, I decided, would be the beginning of something new. I would no longer beg for love or respect. I would claim what was mine. Outside, the night was still. The moonlight fell across the dresser, where that document waited, patient and silent. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel helpless. I felt powerful. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock on the hallway wall. My face still throbbed from the blows, and when I looked in the mirror, I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me. My left cheek was purple and swollen, and the skin under my right eye had turned a faint shade of blue. But beneath the bruises, something else had changed. My gaze was no longer soft or pleading. It was steady, cold. I moved quietly through the house, careful not to make any noise. I knew Daniel and Melissa would be asleep for at least another hour before getting ready for work. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was from purpose. In the dim light, I opened my dresser drawer and took out the small brown folder that had been waiting there for years. Inside it, perfectly preserved in its plastic sleeve, was the deed to the house, the original document in my name. I ran my fingers over my late husband's signature and whispered, "We built this together, Robert. I won't let them destroy it." For the first time since that awful night, a flicker of peace touched me. I wasn't powerless. I had proof. I had leverage. I dressed simply dark pants, my old navy coat, and the flat shoes that had carried me through decades of hard work. I waited until I heard the sound of Daniel's footsteps upstairs, then the shower running, then the front door slamming as he left. A few minutes later, Melissa's heels clicked across the wooden floor and then faded as she too left for work. I waited another half hour to be sure. Then I took the folder, slipped it into my purse, and stepped out through the back door. The air outside was cold and sharp, but it woke me up in a way no coffee ever could. I walked 3 blocks through the quiet Georgetown streets until I reached a familiar small brick house with a white porch and a crooked mailbox. The nameplate still read, "George Patterson, Esquire, Ret." George had been one of my late husband's closest friends, a lawyer who had handled our will years ago. He had retired long ago, but I knew he still kept his mind sharp and his contacts closer. When he opened the door, he was wearing an old robe and glasses perched on the end of his nose. His gray hair stuck out in every direction. "Margaret?" he said, surprised. "Good Lord, what happened to your face?" I stepped inside without answering right away. My throat tightened at the sight of his concern. "I need your help, George," I said finally, my voice low but firm. "I need to sell a house." He blinked, confused. "Sell a house? Yours?" "Yes," I said, setting the folder on his dining table. "This one." George opened the folder and looked through the papers. I could see the moment he realized what he was holding. His brows lifted. "This is the original deed," he said quietly. "Still in your name. I thought Daniel transferred it years ago?" I shook my head. "He said he did, but he never registered it. I signed a private contract, nothing more. He thought that made him the owner." George exhaled slowly, removing his glasses. "Well, he was wrong. Legally, Margaret, this property is still yours." A wave of relief washed through me so suddenly that I had to steady myself on the chair. "So I can sell it?" He looked at me seriously. "Yes, you can. But Margaret, are you sure about this? That's your son we're talking about." I met his gaze without hesitation. "A son doesn't raise his hand against his mother, George. Not 15 times, I'm sure." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded slowly, the decision settling between us, like the quiet before a storm. "All right," he said, his tone professional now. "I know a couple who's been looking for a house in your area. They can pay in cash. If you want this done quickly, I can make a few calls." "That's exactly what I want," I said. "I want it done today while they're at work. When they come home, I want them to find strangers living there." "Oh." George hesitated for a second, studying me. "That's quite the statement." "It's justice," I replied simply. Cold, quiet, and overdue. Within minutes, George was on the phone. I sat in silence, sipping the coffee he'd poured me, my hands wrapped around the warm cup to stop them from shaking. He called the couple the Millers, then his friend at the notary office, and finally, a moving company. Watching him handle everything so efficiently made me realize how long I had spent feeling small. Today, I felt something entirely different capable. By late morning, we were in a small notary office downtown. The Millers were a kind, middle-aged couple, the sort who smiled with their eyes, not just their mouths. They didn't ask why I was selling so suddenly. Maybe the price I offered was enough explanation. When I signed the final document, my hands were steady. I handed the house keys to Mrs. Miller and said, "You can move in today if you'd like. Everything inside is yours to keep. I don't want anything from that house." She looked surprised but touched. "Thank you. We've dreamed of a home like that." I smiled faintly. "I hope it brings you happiness, more than it ever brought me." George and I walked to the bank afterward to deposit the check. The numbers on the screen didn't impress me. They didn't feel like freedom yet, just numbers. "What will you do now?" George asked gently as we stepped out onto the busy sidewalk. "I'll stay with a friend in San Francisco for a while," I said. "Helen's been asking me to visit for years. Maybe I'll finally take her up on it." He smiled. "You deserve some peace, Margaret." Peace. The word lingered in my mind like a fragile promise. We parted ways outside the bank. As I walked to the bus terminal, the winter wind bit at my cheeks, but I didn't mind. I bought a one-way ticket to San Francisco, carrying nothing but my purse, a small suitcase, and the folder with the canceled deed. While I waited for the bus, I imagined Daniel coming home. I could see it so clearly, the confused jingle of his keys at the front door, the twist of the knob that no longer turned, the moment he'd realized that the locks had been changed, that the house, his supposed house, was no longer his. Would he be angry? Desperate? Probably both. Should I feel guilty? Perhaps. But guilt had no place left in me. Each time the thought tried to creep in, I remembered the sting of his hand, the echo of Melissa's laughter. That was all the reminder I needed. The bus arrived, and as it pulled away from the terminal, I looked out the window at the shrinking city skyline. My phone began to vibrate in my purse again and again. Daniel. Then Melissa. Then Daniel again. I didn't answer. I turned the phone off, watching the gray sky stretch over the horizon as we headed west. Somewhere along the way, as the city lights faded and the road unrolled endlessly ahead, I felt something strange, a kind of lightness I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was freedom. By the time we reached San Francisco, night had fallen. The terminal lights glowed warmly through the mist, and I spotted Helen waiting near the entrance, waving frantically. "Margaret," she called, rushing toward me. Her embrace was warm and familiar, the kind that reminded me I still belonged somewhere. But when she pulled back and saw my face, her smile faltered. "Oh, honey, what happened?" "My son," I said simply. "But it's over now." She didn't ask for details. She just took my suitcase, linked her arm through mine, and said, "Let's get you home." As we drove through the winding streets to her small house overlooking the bay, I gazed out the window, the city lights reflecting on the water like scattered stars. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe. Really breathe. The air felt cold, but it was clean, untainted by bitterness or fear. That night, as I lay in Helen's guest room, I thought about the house I had left behind, the one where my son's voice still echoed in my mind. Somewhere, Daniel was probably shouting, demanding explanations, calling lawyers. Let him. My war was over. And for the first time in decades, I had won. Helen's house sat on a quiet hill, overlooking the fog-covered bay. A small white cottage, surrounded by lavender bushes and wind chimes that sang softly whenever the breeze passed through. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful at first, as if the stillness itself reminded me of all the noise I had left behind. For the first few nights, I couldn't sleep properly. I would wake up in the dark, startled by the sound of the waves, my heart pounding as though Daniel's voice might erupt from the silence. Helen tried not to push me, but she was observant, in that gentle way only old friends could be. She had been my neighbor decades ago, before I sold my apartment to help Daniel buy his so-called dream home. Life had taken her west, where she had remarried, then lost her second husband a few years earlier. Now she lived alone, with a calico cat named Maisie, and a heart big enough to shelter anyone who needed warmth. The morning after I arrived, she made pancakes and poured me a cup of strong black coffee. "You look like you haven't slept in weeks," she said softly. "I haven't," I admitted, tracing the rim of the mug with my finger. "I keep replaying everything. His face, the sound of it." Helen reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "You did what you had to do. Don't let guilt creep in, Margaret." He made his choices. I nodded, though a part of me wasn't convinced. A mother's heart never stops making excuses for her child, even when it shouldn't. We spent the next few days talking in fragments, stories about our younger years, about how different the world had felt when our husbands were still alive, about recipes and books, and the small things that had once filled our days. But every conversation seemed to end in the same quiet sigh, the acknowledgement that time changes people, sometimes into strangers we wish we'd never met. On the third night, Helen convinced me to go for a walk along the pier. The air was salty, the fog rolling in slow and thick. Seagulls screamed above us, their wings ghostly white against the dimming sky. I clutched my coat tighter and asked the question that had been burning in my chest since the bus ride. "Do you think there's something broken in me, that I could raise someone like that?" Helen stopped walking. "No, Margaret. There's something broken in him. You gave him love, stability, everything you could. What he did was his choice, not your failure. Her words should have comforted me, but instead, they made me ache. Because deep down, I couldn't help but wonder if love itself had made me blind. That night, as I lay in the guest bed, I turned my phone back on for the first time since leaving. The screen lit up with over 50 missed calls and dozens of messages, Daniel's name appearing again and again like a haunting rhythm. The first few were filled with rage. How could you do this? You stole my house. You'll regret this, Mom. But then they shifted. The tone changed from fury to confusion, then to desperation. Mom, please call me. Melissa left. She took everything. Oh, I didn't mean to hurt you. Please answer. I'm sorry. I swear, I didn't know what I was doing. I stared at the messages until the screen dimmed. My thumb hovered over the call button for a moment, and then I turned the phone off again. I couldn't let him pull me back into that world. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The next morning, Helen found me sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket with an untouched cup of tea beside me. He called, didn't he? She asked. Many times. And you didn't answer. No. I sighed. He's not sorry for what he did, Helen. He's sorry for what he lost. Helen nodded slowly. Then don't give him back the power to hurt you. Those words stuck with me. Power. I had given Daniel power all my life over my choices, my peace, even my happiness. But that was over now. During the following weeks, I began to rediscover small pleasures I had long forgotten. Helen's garden became my refuge. Every morning, I'd tend to her flowers, pruning the roses, trimming the lavender, feeling the soil between my fingers. The rhythm of it was healing, grounding. The scent of damp earth and salt air wrapped around me like a balm. Some evenings we would sit on her porch swing, watching the sunset fade into streaks of orange and violet. You know, Helen said one evening, you could stay here as long as you want. There's no rush to decide what comes next. But I already knew I wouldn't stay forever. I could feel the restless pull inside me, the need for something truly mine. I had spent 61 years belonging to everyone else, a daughter, a wife, a mother. I wanted to know what it meant to just be Margaret. One night, after Helen went to bed, I sat in the living room with my old laptop, scrolling through listings, small homes, cottages, country houses, and then I founded a modest ranch property just outside of Austin, Texas. Half an acre of land, a small stream running through the back, and a porch that faced the sunrise. The photos weren't impressive, but something about it called to me. It wasn't luxury. It was peace. The next morning, I showed Helen. I think I found where I want to start over. She studied the photos, then looked up at me, smiling softly. It looks perfect, just big enough for your heart to stretch out again. I don't even know if I can manage a place like that alone. End of 2. Yes, you can, she said, squeezing my hand. You already survived the hardest part. A week later, after a few calls with George to handle the legal and financial side, the property was mine. Just like that, signed, sealed, and truly mine. When Helen drove me to the airport, she hugged me tightly, refusing to let go for a long moment. Call me when you arrive, all right? I will. And Margaret, don't look back. The flight to Texas felt surreal. As the plane cut through the clouds, I watched the landscape shift from the misty blues of the coast to the golden brown fields of the south. My heart was a knot of fear and excitement, two emotions I hadn't felt together in a long time. When I finally reached the ranch, the real estate agent handed me the keys with a warm smile. Welcome home, Mrs. Walker. Home. The word made my throat tighten. The house was small but cozy. 2 bedrooms, a creaky wooden floor, a kitchen that smelled faintly of cedar. The previous owner, an elderly widower, had left behind some furniture and even a few potted plants by the window. Outside, The land stretched in soft rolling hills. The stream shimmered like liquid silver in the afternoon Sunday. I stood there on the porch, the wind brushing against my face, and whispered, "I'm free." That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. The next morning, I woke to birdsong. Real birdsong, not the sound of sirens, not the clatter of dishes, not the echo of angry voices. Just life, simple and unhurried. I made myself coffee and stepped outside barefoot, feeling the dew-soaked grass under my feet. For once, the quiet didn't frighten me. It felt like a friend. Over the next few days, I began to build a rhythm. I unpacked my few belongings, bought some groceries from the small town nearby, and met a few locals, friendly, curious people who didn't pry. To them, I was just Mrs. Walker, the new lady who bought the old ranch. No one knew my story, and for now, that was how I wanted it. But at night, when the crickets sang and the house grew still, my mind would sometimes drift back. I would wonder if Daniel had found another place to live, if he was still angry, if Melissa had truly left him for good. Those thoughts came like passing shadows, faint and fleeting. I didn't push them away completely. I just let them pass, like clouds across a calm sky. One evening, as I was sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, I saw a lone figure walking up the road. For a split second, my heart seized irrationally, fearing it was Daniel. But it was only an elderly neighbor, Mr. Johnson, carrying a basket of fresh eggs. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said kindly. "We look out for each other around here." His wife, Marlene, soon followed with a jar of homemade jam. We chatted for a while, and when they left, I felt something warm settle inside me. Belonging. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. "I thought revenge would taste bitter," I wrote, "but it tastes like peace." As the moon rose over my new home, casting soft light through the window, I realized that this was what healing looked like, not forgetting, not pretending the pain never happened, but learning to live beautifully in spite of it. And for the first time since that night at Daniel's house, I smiled, not out of politeness, not out of habit, but from the quiet joy of simply being alive. The weeks after moving into the ranch unfolded like a soft, unfamiliar dream. Each morning, I woke to the same symphony, the rooster crowing from the neighbor's farm, the rustle of wind through the pecan trees, the distant hum of life beginning again. I would brew coffee, sit on the porch wrapped in a shawl, and watch the sun rise above the hills. There was something sacred about those early hours, quiet, still, untouched by memory. I had started planting small things, tomatoes, herbs, a few flowers by the front steps. The soil was rough and dry at first, but with time and care, it began to soften. Watching the first green shoots push through reminded me of myself, fragile, uncertain, but alive. My days settled into a gentle rhythm. I'd spend mornings tending the garden, afternoons exploring the trails that wound behind the property, and evenings reading by the fire with a cup of chamomile tea. Sometimes I would write in my old notebook, not about Daniel or the past, but about what I saw, what I felt, and what I hoped to build. Writing, for the first time, wasn't about pain. It was about rediscovering my own voice. The Johnsons, my nearest neighbors, had become dear friends. Mr. Johnson brought me fresh milk every Monday, and his wife, Marlene, would stop by with homemade biscuits and gossip about the small town nearby. They treated me like family, without ever prying into why a woman my age had suddenly bought a ranch alone. It was a kindness I didn't know how to repay, except by offering my company, my cooking, and my gratitude. "You've got a good soul, Margaret," Marlene told me one afternoon as we sat shelling peas on the porch. "You remind me of my sister, always giving too much of herself to others, but you've got that quiet strength too. I can see it in your eyes." Her words warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. For years, I'd been invisible even to myself. But here, surrounded by the hum of crickets and the scent of fresh earth, I was beginning to feel seen again. By the third month, I had stopped checking my phone entirely. It lay forgotten in a drawer, turned off, buried beneath old letters and receipts. I had promised myself that if Daniel truly wanted to make amends, he would find a way to show it, not with words, but with time. Until then, I owed him nothing. Then, one quiet Thursday morning, the past came knocking. I had been out near the back field, trimming the wild grass by the fence, when I saw a car turning down the long dirt road that led to my house. My first instinct was to think it was a delivery truck, or maybe Mr. Johnson coming early with his usual groceries. But as the vehicle drew closer, my heart froze. It was Daniel's car. I stood there, hands gripping the garden shears, unable to move. Time folded in on itself. The air thickened. I could see him through the windshield, thinner than I remembered, his once proud posture replaced by something slumped and weary. The car came to a stop near the porch. He stepped out slowly, wearing jeans and a wrinkled shirt. His eyes scanned the house, then landed on me. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the wind brushing through the trees. "Mom," he said finally, his voice rough, almost hoarse. I swallowed hard. "Don't call me that." My tone surprised even me, calm, steady, but edged with years of unshed anger. He looked as if I had slapped him. "Margaret," he corrected quietly, his eyes dropping to the ground. "Can I talk to you?" "What for?" I need to explain." He hesitated. A part of me wanted to turn and walk back into the house, lock the door, and pretend he had never come. But another part, the part that still believed closure had value, told me to face him. "Fine," I said at last, "but you can stay out here." He nodded, stepping closer but keeping his distance. For the first time, I noticed how much he had changed. The arrogance was gone. His hair was unkempt, his skin pale. He looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of his choices had physically diminished him. "I lost everything," he began. "Melissa left a week after you sold the house. She took my savings, my car, everything. I tried to find work, but no one wants to rent to someone without a permanent address. I've been staying in my car for the last 2 months." I said nothing. He continued, his voice trembling. "I know you hate me, and you have every right to. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to understand. I wasn't myself that night. I was angry, tired, drunk. You hit me 15 times, Daniel." The words came out like ice. 15, that's not a mistake, that's a choice. He flinched, his shoulders collapsing inward. "I know," he whispered. "And every night since then, I've seen your face. I can't sleep without hearing that sound. I don't know how to undo what I did." "You can't." We stood in silence for a long moment. The air felt heavy, thick with memories neither of us wanted to name. Finally, he looked up. "I came here because I have nowhere else to go. Please, just for a little while. I need a place to stay until I can find work again." I stared at him, the boy I once swaddled, the man who had once made me proud, now standing before me as a stranger begging for shelter. I wanted to feel pity. I wanted to feel something maternal. But what I felt, instead, was an old, quiet strength. "No," I said softly. His eyes widened. "What? You heard me. No. You're 39 years old. You're not helpless. You made your choices, and now you live with them, just like I did. Please, Mom, don't." My voice cut through the air like a blade. "You lost the right to call me that when you raised your hand against me." He blinked rapidly, his breath hitching. "So that's it? You're just going to abandon me?" "I didn't abandon you, Daniel. You abandoned yourself the moment you forgot what respect means." His jaw clenched, and I saw the faint spark of anger flare in his eyes again. "You have no heart," he spat. "You sold my house." "It was my house," I interrupted, my voice rising for the first time. "My house, my money, my years of work. You took everything I had and still thought you could take more, but not anymore." He stared at me for a long, trembling moment. Then he said, bitterly, "You'll die alone out here." "Maybe," I said, my voice calm again, "but I'd rather die alone in peace than live surrounded by cruelty." For a moment, I thought he might lunge forward, say something crueler, but he didn't. Instead, he turned abruptly, stormed to his car, and slammed the door. The tires kicked up dust as he sped down the road, leaving nothing but silence and the faint echo of his engine behind. When the sound finally faded, I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands trembled, and my knees felt weak. I sank onto the porch steps, staring out at the horizon until my vision blurred. Marlene appeared not long after, walking up the path with her basket of eggs. She took one look at me and gasped, "Margaret, are you all right?" "Who was that?" "My son," I said quietly. "He found me." She sat beside me without a word, setting the basket down. For a while, we just sat there together, watching the last light of the sun dip behind the trees. "You did the right thing," she said softly after a long silence. "Why doesn't it feel like it?" I whispered. "Because you're a mother," she said simply. "And mothers never stop caring, no matter how much they've been hurt. But caring doesn't mean surrendering." That night, I lay in bed, listening to the steady hum of the crickets. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept replaying the look in Daniel's eyes before he left, part anger, part regret, part something I couldn't name. Was he capable of changing? Maybe. But it was no longer my responsibility to find out. As dawn broke, light filtered softly through the curtains. I rose, washed my face, and stepped outside. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "You're safe now." Because for the first time, I truly was. The morning after Daniel's visit, I woke to a silence so thick it felt almost alive. The birds weren't singing, the wind barely moved through the trees, and for a strange moment, I thought the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. My hands trembled slightly as I made coffee, the familiar aroma doing little to steady me. My chest felt heavy, as if all the air had been drained from it during yesterday's confrontation. I couldn't get the image of Daniel's face out of my mind, the mixture of anger, shame, and despair twisting together like a storm. For all his cruelty, he was still my child, and somewhere deep inside me, a small, aching part still wanted to believe there was hope for him. But I had to remind myself, love and trust were not the same thing. By mid-morning, I tried to distract myself with chores. I fed the chickens, watered the garden, and hung fresh laundry on the line. The ordinary rhythm of life had always been my refuge, something predictable in a world that no longer was. But even as I worked, a nagging unease lingered in the back of my mind, a feeling that something wasn't over yet. That afternoon, as I was arranging flowers on the kitchen table, the phone rang. It startled me. Very few people had my new number, only George, Helen, and the Johnsons. My heart quickened as I picked up the receiver. Margaret Walker speaking. Olivia, a familiar male voice said, though older, rougher. "It's George." Relief washed over me. "George, thank goodness. I was just thinking of calling you." His tone was measured, careful. "I wish I were calling with good news. Your son came to see me." I froze, gripping the edge of the counter. "Daniel?" "Yes. He's angry. He says you tricked him, that you weren't in your right mind when you sold the house." I closed my eyes, taking a long, slow breath. "He's going to try to sue me, isn't he?" "That's what he said," George confirmed. "But don't panic. Legally, he doesn't have a leg to stand on. The deed was in your name, and you were of sound mind when you signed the sale. I kept copies of all the documents and the notary statements. You're completely protected." Then why do I feel so terrified? I whispered. Because he's your son, George said gently. You've spent a lifetime forgiving him, protecting him, hoping he'd change. Now, you're protecting yourself, and that's a new kind of courage. I sat down slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. I don't want to live in fear again, George. You won't, he assured me. But be careful. Desperate people can do foolish things. Keep your doors locked. Don't open them unless you know who's there. And if anything feels wrong, call the sheriff. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long while, staring at the cup of tea I hadn't touched. Fear crept up my spine like an old ghost, familiar, unwanted, persistent. I hated that he could still reach me this way, even from miles away. That evening, Marlene stopped by with her husband. She took one look at my face and frowned. Something's wrong, isn't it? I hesitated, then nodded. Daniel's trying to sue me, Mr. Johnson whistled low. Over the house you bought with your own money? That boy's out of his mind. He's angry, I said quietly. He wants to punish me for standing up to him. Marlene reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. He can't hurt you anymore, Margaret. You're safe here. We'll make sure of it. Her words were a balm I didn't know I needed. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. Every sound outside made me flinch, a car passing down the dirt road, a door creaking in the wind, even the cry of a crow on the fence post. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Daniel wouldn't dare show up again. But the fear lingered like the faint scent of smoke long after a fire's gone out. Then, late one night, the phone rang again. My heart leapt. For a moment, I considered letting it ring, but something told me to answer. Hello? Margaret. George's voice came again, calm but firm. You can relax. He dropped it. It took me a moment to understand. The lawsuit? Yes, I spoke to his lawyer this afternoon. Apparently, they all told him the same thing: he has no case. He'd lose everything, and it would cost him what little money he has left. So, he gave up. The relief that flooded through me was so overwhelming I had to sit down. It's over? For now, yes, George said. He's renting a small place in Houston. From what I've heard, he's trying to get his life back together. I exhaled slowly, tension leaving my body like a long sigh. Thank you, George, for everything. He paused. Margaret, may I say something? Of course. You've shown more strength than most people ever find in a lifetime. Don't let fear steal that from you. He may be your son, but you don't owe him your peace. Tears welled up in my eyes, silent and uninvited. You sound like Robert, I whispered. He chuckled softly. I'll take that as a compliment. Good night, my dear. After I hung up, I sat for a long time by the kitchen window, watching the night stretch across the fields. For the first time since Daniel's arrival, I didn't feel hunted. The shadows outside were just shadows again, not threats. The quiet wasn't oppressive anymore. It was comforting. That weekend, I decided to take back my life completely. I baked bread for the first time in years, filled the house with the scent of rosemary and warmth, and even invited the Johnsons over for lunch. We sat on the porch, eating and laughing, the sound of our voices echoing softly through the open air. At one point, Mr. Johnson leaned back and said, You know, Margaret, this place suits you. It's like you've always belonged here. Maybe I have, I said with a smile. Maybe I just had to lose everything first to find where I was meant to be. That night, when I walked back inside, the air was filled with the faint hum of crickets and the scent of baked bread cooling on the counter. I lit a candle and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook. For months, I had written only brief thoughts, small reflections about peace, growth, or gratitude. But that night, the words flowed differently, stronger, fuller. I wrote about everything: the betrayal, the pain, the fear, and the slow rebirth that had followed. For the first time, I told the whole story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. As the candle burned low, I realized something profound. I hadn't just escaped Daniel's violence. I had escaped the version of myself that believed enduring cruelty was the same as love. The following week, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The envelope was plain, the handwriting shaky but familiar. Daniel's. My first instinct was to tear it apart, to throw it in the fire. But something stopped me. I sat down, unfolded the paper, and began to read. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry. I've started going to a support group for men who've done what I did. They make us face our actions. I see myself for what I am, and it's hard to live with. But I'm trying. I know you probably never want to see me again. Still, I hope you're happy. I hope you found peace. Maybe one day I'll earn the right to say your name without shame. Daniel. The letter trembled in my hands. I didn't know whether to cry or to laugh. For the first time, his words felt real, not manipulative, not desperate, but human. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my dresser drawer, next to the old deed, the symbol of both my suffering and my freedom. That night, I stepped outside into the cool Texas air. The stars glittered above, endless and unjudging. I whispered softly, to no one in particular, maybe you're finally learning. My son, maybe we both are. The breeze carried the words away, scattering them across the dark horizon. And for the first time, I didn't look back. Months passed, and with them, the raw sting of memory began to fade into something softer, like an old scar that only ached when the rain came. The ranch had become my sanctuary, my small piece of the world untouched by cruelty or fear. The days flowed easily now, one into another. Morning coffee on the porch, gardening in the warmth of the Texas Sunday, evenings spent writing in my notebook with the hum of cicadas outside the window. One morning, as I was collecting eggs from the hen house, I found a letter in the mailbox. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat and elegant. Inside was a note from a woman named Matilda, the director of a women's shelter in Austin. She had somehow read my story, not my journal version, but the short essay I'd written months earlier, and quietly submitted to a local newspaper under a pseudonym. Her words were warm and earnest. Dear Mrs. Walker, your story reached our shelter last month. We've read it aloud to some of the women here. Mothers, daughters, grandmothers, all of them trapped in silence until they heard about you. You have no idea what your courage has done for them. Would you consider visiting us sometime? I believe your voice could help others find their own. With gratitude, Matilda. I must have read that letter a dozen times. The idea of speaking publicly terrified me. But there was something in Matilda's words that stirred something deep inside me, a sense of responsibility, maybe even purpose. For the first time, my pain wasn't just a private wound. It could be a light for someone else. When I told Helen about it over the phone that evening, she was thrilled. Of course you should go, she said. If your story helped one woman escape the kind of life you did, then it's worth it. I don't know if I'm ready, I admitted. Helen's voice softened. You don't have to be ready, Margaret. You just have to be honest. 2 weeks later, I drove to Austin. It was a bright, cloudless day. The shelter was a modest 2-story building, painted a cheerful shade of yellow, with a small garden in front, filled with wildflowers. Matilda met me at the door, a tall woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair tied back in a bun. Mrs. Walker, she said warmly, taking my hands. Thank you for coming. Please, call me Margaret. She led me through the building's small bedrooms, a shared kitchen, a playroom for children. Women of all ages moved quietly through the halls, some avoiding eye contact, others offering tentative smiles. I recognized something in their faces, that same mixture of exhaustion and fragile hope I once saw in the mirror. We gathered in a small common room where a dozen women sat in a circle. Matilda introduced me and explained briefly who I was. I felt their eyes on me, curious, cautious, expectant. I took a deep breath and began to speak. At 61, I said, my voice trembling at first. I thought my life was already written. I thought I was too old to start over. I was wrong. I told them everything. The years of sacrifice, the humiliation, the night my son's hand struck me for the first time, and the cold decision that changed everything. As I spoke, the fear melted away. The words poured out of me like water bursting from a cracked dam. When I finished, the room was silent. Then a young woman with bruises, still faintly visible on her arms, raised her hand. "How did you find the strength to leave?" she asked softly. "I didn't find strength first," I said. "I found dignity. Strength came later, after I realized I deserved better." Another woman, older, whispered, "Did you forgive him?" That question lingered in the air. I thought of Daniel's letter in my drawer, his shaky handwriting, his confession. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word," I said finally. "I understand now that he's trying to change, and that's enough for me. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means I no longer let what he did define who I am." After the session ended, several women hugged me, some crying openly. Matilda stood near the door, her eyes glistening. "You have a gift, Margaret," she said. "You make people believe again." On my drive back to the ranch, I felt lighter, not because I had erased the past, but because I had given it purpose. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote the words that would later become the title of my book, Starting Over at 61. I wrote every evening for months, pouring everything I'd learned into those pages, not as a confession, but as a guide. I wrote about silence and survival, about finding strength when no one believes in you, about the quiet revenge of living well. When I sent the finished manuscript to Helen, she passed it to a friend who worked for a small publishing house in San Francisco. To my surprise, they wanted to publish it. "Your story," the editor said over the phone, "isn't just powerful, it's necessary. There are women everywhere who need to know it's not too late." Andrew Crand. 6 months later, I stood in a small bookstore in downtown Austin for my first book signing. I was nervous, my hands trembling as I arranged copies on the table. The room filled quickly, mostly women, some with gray hair like mine, others much younger, all of them carrying something heavy in their eyes. When it was my turn to speak, I began with a simple truth. Healing doesn't erase the past, it builds something new on top of it. I'm not here to tell you how to forgive. I'm here to remind you that you have the right to begin again. As I spoke, I saw nods, tears, quiet smiles. For the first time, I wasn't just telling my story, I was watching it ripple outward, changing others the way it had changed me. After the event, as people lined up for autographs, I noticed someone standing near the back of the room, motionless, uncertain. My breath caught. Daniel. He looked thinner, older, his hair had grayed at the temples, and there were dark circles under his eyes. In his hands, he held a copy of my book. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, everything stopped. The crowd, the noise, the rustle of paper, all of it faded. He didn't move closer until nearly everyone else had left. When he finally reached me, he placed the book on the table. "I read it," he said quietly. "Twice." I stayed seated, my pulse steady but my heart uneasy. "Why are you here, Daniel?" He swallowed hard. "To say I'm sorry. Really sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I had to tell you face to face." I studied him. He wasn't the man who once towered over me in anger. His voice shook. His eyes carried something I had never seen in them before, humility. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a white envelope. "It's not much, but I've been saving. I want to repay you for the house. I don't need your money, I said quietly. I know, he replied, but I need to give it. Something inside me softened, just slightly. If you really want to make it right, I said, donate it to the women's shelter in Austin. They need it more than I do. He blinked, then nodded slowly. I'll do that. We stood in silence for a moment. Then, almost timidly, he said, I'm going to a support group. For men like me. I don't expect you to believe me, but I'm trying. I believe you're trying, I said. And that's a start. Oh. He looked up, surprised by my calm. You're different, he said. I am, I replied. Because for the first time in my life, I chose myself. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I'm glad you did. You deserve to be happy. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. Goodbye, Mom. The word hit me like a whisper carried on wind, gentle, uncertain, but no longer heavy. I didn't respond until after he was gone, and even then, it came out softly, meant more for me than for him. Goodbye, Daniel. When the door closed behind him, Helen placed a hand on my shoulder. Are you okay? I nodded slowly. Yes? For the first time, I think I am. That night, back at the ranch, I sat on the porch watching the stars. Popcorn, the caramel-colored stray dog I'd adopted weeks earlier, lay at my feet, snoring softly. The Texas night hummed with the sound of cicadas and distant frogs. I opened my notebook one last time and wrote, Forgiveness is not a gift for others. It's the freedom we give ourselves. I closed the book, leaned back in my chair, and let the cool night air wash over me. The past no longer hurt. It had simply ended. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that pain has a strange way of teaching us who we really are. For so many years, I thought being a mother meant sacrificing everything, my time, my voice, even my dignity. I believed that if I just kept giving, love would eventually come back to me. But love doesn't grow in the shadows of silence. It grows in the light of respect. When Daniel raised his hand against me, he didn't just break my trust, he shattered the illusion that love without boundaries can survive. And as painful as that night was, it became the beginning of my rebirth. Because sometimes, the moment you think your story is ending is the moment it finally begins. I want every woman who hears my voice to know this. You are not too old to start over. You are not too broken to heal. You are not too late to choose yourself. Whether you are 20, 40, or 61, it is never too late to take back the pen and rewrite your story. Strength is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to stand anyway, trembling, uncertain, but standing all the same. I didn't wake up one day brave. I woke up tired, tired of hurting, tired of being small, and that exhaustion became my courage. Today, I live in peace. The air smells of rosemary and rain. The sun rises gently over my porch, and sometimes I catch myself smiling for no reason at all. I've learned that forgiveness is not about erasing the past. It's about freeing yourself from it, about letting the wound close, even if the scar remains. And when I look back on my journey, I don't see a victim anymore. I see a woman who survived, who rebuilt, who found her voice again, and who finally learned that loving herself was not selfish, but sacred. If my story has touched you, if it made you think, or helped you breathe a little easier, stay with me. There are more stories to tell, more hearts to heal, more reminders that you are not alone. So take a deep breath, and don't forget to support this channel. So together, we can keep sharing the kind of stories that remind us all it's never too late to begin again.